it's my job. I think that's the main thing. When you're a leader, it's your job. There shouldn't be any extra, kudos given to you. Everyone has their own piece in the puzzle, and just because your face is more prominent than others does not mean that the mission is any less doable with like one piece missing or another piece missing. So I guess it's not about you. It's about the team.
Welcome to the Long Blue Leadership Podcast, presented by the United States Air Force Academy Association of Graduates and Air Force Academy Foundation. These are powerful stories shared with candor by Academy graduates, all leaders of character who live them. This is how the Academy experience has shaped their pasts, present, and future. We present these stories to help develop you along your leadership journey. Your host for this edition of Long Blue Leadership is Lieutenant Colonel Retired Navir Walkowitz, USAFA Class of 99 and currently serving as Association of Graduates Senior Vice President of Engagement. And now, Navir Walkowitz.
My guest today is Cadet First Class Andrew Cormier, USAFA Class of 25. Andrew stands out among the finest examples of those who have taken the service before self aspect of their work as developing leaders very seriously. In Andrew's case, he helps and supports his fellow cadets by guiding them to their optimal career paths through the guests and their experiences on his podcast. This is a new approach for Long Blue Leadership, and one we think you'll appreciate, because we're looking at leadership through the eyes of one who both follows and leads, thriving in both spaces. We'll talk with Andrew about his life before and during his time at the Academy. We'll ask where he's headed when he graduates. We'll discuss the role he's taken on as a podcaster, and we'll ask how he's successfully led and followed. We'll end with Andrew's takeaways and leadership tips. Andrew, welcome to Long Blue Leadership. We're so glad you're here.
Thanks for having me, Navir.
Absolutely. So it's got to be a little bit different being on the other side of the podcast mic.
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting to be here. I've done a few before, but they weren't in person, and this was like the highest quality, so a little bit of imposter syndrome, not gonna lie.
Oh, goodness. Well, we'll learn from each other, right? I think that's the best. We can always be learning. We can always get better. So I'm excited to take in some of the things that you do as well.
Awesome.
So feel really good about that. Well, one of the things we like to do on Long Blue Leadership is we rewind the clock a little bit. Some clocks are further rewound back than others. And so I'm really excited to kind of get to know you. Where were you before the Academy? Where'd you grow up? What was life like?
Okay. As much as like my I'm not as chronologically advanced, like relative to, maybe my experience in high school. I grew up in Fitchburg, Massachusetts. A lot of pride coming from the East Coast. My parents, my dad, he worked as a general contractor. So I spent a lot of summers laying tile, doing framing houses, all that sort of stuff, just like, a general laborer, honestly, just like sweeping up a lot of dust and mess as he, actually did all the hard work. And then I went to a tech school, Montechusett Regional Vocational Technical High School. It's a mouthful, but I went there mostly because my brother went there. I wasn't a huge decision maker back then, like I consider myself somewhat now. And I studied machine technology and I'm working on metal pieces, like running lathes and mill machines and electronic discharge machines just to, I didn't really know what preparing for the future was like, but that was the kind of path I was on. But then, I grew up playing hockey and lacrosse, and I realized that I had an opportunity with that somewhat. And I was traveling the East Coast, playing lacrosse. I think it was after a tournament in Ashton, Pennsylvania. Me and my dad got a phone call from Coach Wilson, the Air Force Academy lacrosse coach, saying, "Hey, we saw you play this weekend. We'd love to have you out." And so that's like a really quick rundown of where I come from. But I guess moral of the story, I really appreciate the background, the kind of blue collar experiences that I've had when it comes to growing up in Massachusetts.
No, that's awesome. And I think it's great to know that, you're not afraid to get your hands dirty, to, to work hard and grit.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of also synonymous with hockey. I feel like,
Yeah.
you work hard, you dig. So let's talk about that a little bit more. Older brother then. So you're the one of two?
Yes.
Any other siblings?
Yeah, just me and my brother.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what was it like growing up with an older brother? Were you always the one that he got to test things on, or what did that look like?
No, my brother, he's about 3.5 years older than me. So we never really were in school at the same time. He was always, 4 grades ahead. So we went to all the same schools, but he was, leaving just as soon as I was arriving. But no, he was a great big brother. I was more of like the wild child. Me and my mom will sometimes look at the family videos, and it's me kind of just being this goofball, like not appreciating things, like complaining, whining, all this stuff, while Zach's over here like trying to help me. And like I remember this video of we lived in this house where the driveway was very steep, and so we would just like drive our little like plastic carts down the driveway, and my brother was over here like trying to push me up the hill, and I'm over here like yelling at him. And
Go
I'm
faster!
Like, no, I was like stop, Zach, stop.
Oh.
And like looking back, I'm like, wow, I was just a goofball. He's over here trying to help me, and
Right.
But no, he was a great big brother, and to be honest, growing up, I consider myself to have like a really spongy brain in terms of I want to learn things through other people's experiences so that I don't make the same mistakes myself. And so when I would see my brother do all these things, he got into lacrosse, I got into lacrosse, he went to Monty Tech, I saw what cool opportunities there were with that, I went there. And so it was kind of like he tested the waters for me, and then I ended up following suit. And it's kind of changed since then. I've come to a little bit more of like an independent person, but growing up, you kind of always look up to your big brother.
Yes, I love that. And so aside from being recognized through your lacrosse sport, how did the military come into play? Was that something always on the radar? Is it somewhere in your family, maybe not with your dad or your mom, but elsewhere?
Yeah. My family wasn't big on the military. Not that, we grew up pretty disciplined, but on my mom's side, her parents are immigrants from Canada. So, there's not a whole bunch of military history there. But on my dad's side, my Pepe, his dad, was drafted for the Korean War. And so he did communications for 4 years, and then he got out. But beyond that, I mean, he passed when I was young, so I never really got to he never really had the opportunity to instill lessons into a sentient person, more or less. So, yeah, it felt more or less like I was doing this for the first time. Like it wasn't a huge military thing. But in high school, again, my brother, it was an open house. I was in 7th or 8th grade. I get brought to the Marine Corps Junior ROTC program at my high school. And I was really like, what's going on here? And
in an excited way? Or
kind of. It was more like intrigued, not super. Like I was like, my first question after he gave his little pitch was, so I have to serve? And he was like, no. And I was like kind of relieved. So that's kind of my initial impression.
Mm-hmm.
I go to school. I'm not enrolled initially. And then, to be honest, I don't remember what urged me to enroll in the program. But I ended up enrolling. I loved it.
What year was that?
It was freshman year.
Okay.
So I did all 3 years because I transferred to a different school my senior year. But I did it all 3 years, and I loved it, mostly because of the service aspect of it. We did a lot of – it wasn't like – I feel like ROTC, especially at the academy, because, if other cadets see this, they're probably going to flame me for it. But it has this perception of like collecting badges and ribbons and like, cadet general, all that sort of stuff. And that was like so far from what my program was all about. We were doing a bunch of community service, like, in Fitchburg, we would go near the Boys and Girls Club and pick up trash in the area. Obviously, picking up the trash wasn't fun, but just like going out and do something with your buddies on the weekend, that was fun. Countless Salvation Army collections, like we'd sit outside the grocery store, collect money.
Yes.
All those sorts of things were what really like pushed me on. And then I think the culminating thing that like really pushed me to want to pursue this was my sophomore year. We did a humanitarian trip after Hurricane Harvey hit in Texas. So we went down to Wharton, raised a whole bunch of money, took 50 of the about 100 cadet corps, and we posted up in this Boys and Girls Club gymnasium, all on cots. We'd march to breakfast at Wharton Community College, and then we'd spend the day just like going back and forth in teams in our vans, either bringing cabinetry to houses, flooring to houses, drywall to houses, and then we'd, install it because it was all flooded up to pretty much the knee from Hurricane Harvey. And so that week that we spent down there was super impactful to me, especially at the end. There was a bunch of little projects, but centrally there was a big project because this house was basically destroyed. And, coming from a tech school, we have a bunch of plumbers, carpenters, cabinet makers, all these different trades coming together, and they ended up doing something really good for this one family. And so they left for a week, and then they were able to reintroduce them on that Friday. And it was impactful to me. And so, now at the academy, I'm like, I haven't had time to do community service, and I feel bad about it. But that's kind of what really got me interested in it.
Well, I think it's fascinating how, your ability, you worked with your dad. So I think you brought some of those skills, and then again through school. But I think a heart of service is kind of the theme that we're hearing early on in this conversation, what I think we're going to even talk about more.
Yes.
So you were discovered through lacrosse. You went on probably an intercollegiate tour of the academy. And were you like, yes, this is it? Or was it still like
Yeah, so backtrack a little bit. My senior year ended up transferring to Northfield Mount Hermon. It's a college preparatory school, so I was boarding there. And I say that because when I came here, I was really interested in old schools that have a lot of heritage, a lot of tradition. My school, it was like all my fellow Hoggers are going to be disappointed that I forget the year that it was founded by Dwight L. Moody. But it's a very old school, lots of traditions, a lot of fun stuff to students are looking forward to. And seeing what a lot of the freshmen had to do in my trip here, despite it being a relatively younger school compared to West Point and Annapolis, I was like, that's cool. I like the hierarchy structure of it. I really like seeing it. The chapel was out, so I got to see it.
Yes.
Yeah, no, it was one of those sort of situations where I was really looking for a school that had it fit the criteria of getting able to serve tradition, and I really wanted to play college lacrosse. And at that time, it looked like it was gonna fit those descriptions. Okay. Yeah.
So the academy it was, and what was day one like for you?
A few disclaimers. I want to say that one, I didn't end up making the lacrosse team, so I don't want to be, claiming I made it and I didn't. And two.
So let's pause there a second. So you were initially recruited, but you got in. You had to do the whole application and get in on your own because you ended up not being a recruited athlete.
Yes, and I got denied my first time.
Okay,
so,
let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I applied. Well, trade school education, trade 1 week, education other week. Okay. So you can see I might be slightly deficient in certain academic realms. And so that's why I transferred to college preparatory school, because I wanted to, go all in on my academics, hopefully, get me in. It worked in terms of really opening my perspective, but didn't work in terms of getting me into the academy the first try, which, I was initially a little bummed about. But now looking back on it, I'm like, that was, the Falcon Foundation, shout out to them and General Lorenz, everyone. And we actually had the dinner last week. That was super fun. But I didn't get in, but I got offered Falcon Foundation scholarship, and I ended up going to again, picking schools off of tradition, Marion Military Institute, which was, the oldest one on the list of options. And yeah, I went there for a year during COVID. And that's where, I guess the gap is, because I was class of 2020 in high school, graduating class of 25. There's that gap. I hope I answered your question.
That's fantastic, actually. And I think for those listeners who may not be aware of the Falcon Foundation, we have a number of different college military preparatory programs that are affiliated with our academy. And I think it's a wonderful testament to, you apply for the Air Force Academy, you don't apply for a preparatory school, but the academy recognizes when we have areas that are maybe just under the cut line, but someone we're really interested in, and how do we get them there? And so I think it's fantastic that you were able to get a Falcon Foundation scholarship. And I don't call that a gap. I call that just an extra year of preparatory. So I think it's wonderful.
I was definitely prepared more.
Yes. Okay. So you came in on day one feeling pretty good then, because, where others might have been the whole basic training experience just kind of, knock their socks off. You're like, all right, we know this military thing.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah. And I mean, I guess in terms of, I know how to make a bed, I know how to wear a uniform, that was less daunting. I'm a management major. I don't know what the astro or aero people are going through. I'm sure that's very
I'm
difficult.
glad you put that caveat in there. Okay.
Yes. I'm a management major. All the assignments are more or less easy, but it's more just getting the reps in it, and it's very gradual. So I don't want this to make it sound like the academy is easy by any means, because what's difficult about it is the task saturation. They have you doing, it's like stuffing, 10 pounds of sand in a 5-pound bag, that sort of deal. That's where it's difficult, at least for me. And so coming into it with hearing those sort of perceptions, that's how I went into it feeling. And I was kind of right. I mean, basic training wasn't super rigorous. I mean,
you were fit.
I was fit.
Yes.
I was, I was able to memorize things.
It's good because your mind is a sponge, so that was probably helpful.
Yeah, I had all my, my bed making skills were already down pat. So all the really tactical things were taken care of, and I understood that I was going to get yelled at no matter what. And coming into it with that, I was just like, okay, this is a game of attrition, and I just can't quit.
I love that. So how did you translate what you felt was maybe not as difficult and you saw others struggling? Have there been times where you've had to step up and take on a role of being more of a support or a leader amongst your peers?
Yes, of course. I mean, in my baby squad, I wasn't the only, not only preppy, but also they call them prepsters. I was technically a prepster because I didn't go to the P, but, I still did a prep year. And we had a prior enlisted person. And so the 4 or 5 of us had already seen all this stuff before. And when it came to studying the contrails, showing people how to, make their closet and all those sort of things. And also when it came to just being away from home, I had been away from home since I was about 17, and I got there when I was 19 or 20. And so acclimating to living away from home is kind of a difficult challenge. And so just being there for the people that are like, I miss home, I miss my mom, I miss my dad, I miss my home food and all this sort of stuff. There aren't a lot of opportunities for chit chat during basic training, at least towards the beginning, but towards the end, I'm like, you got this. Let's power through. And yeah.
I love that. So let's talk about, while you've been a cadet, maybe some of the ways that you've been a follower and some of the ways that you've been a leader, aside from the one you just kind of shared. What have been some ones that have stood out to you as you're continuing to develop your leadership skills?
Okay. Following, very much freshman year, you're following. Credibility, like understanding where you fall in the credibility hierarchy is somewhat a dictator, an indicator of where you should be in terms of leading and following. And I understood that relative to the rest of my baby squaddies, I might have been slightly above the average in terms of credibility, but in terms of the entire squadron, lowest of the low.
Tell me why. Let's talk about that. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, I remember freshman year when we were, getting quizzed on our shoulder board rankings. It's a ground cloud horizon. and freshmen just have the cloud because their head's in the clouds. They're very unfamiliar with this place, and it's true. Not only do you not know what it's like to have a bunch of GRs in a week as a freshman just coming out of basic training, but you also don't know what it's like to understand an organization. I didn't understand what like a reporting structure, I didn't understand a lot of these intricacies, and I tried my best to have some humility in understanding that and just like keeping my ears open for it. And with that kind of like credibility spectrum, I was confident in the sense that I could be self-sufficient and take care of what I needed to take care of on the academic front, the knowledge, like the K-test front, athletic front. But when it came to, oh, wow, I've never been in a 100-person organization before, and at the bottom of it, this is my time to, take some notes. And I think that's a theme that's definitely followed through with the podcast, especially. Again, I kind of avoided giving a concrete example of the followership.
That's okay. I mean, I think would you say that's something that we're doing every day, right? There's a point, there's a give and take, right?
Yes, yes. I mean, Colonel Ryan Rudder, he was my AOC at the time, A-10 pilot. And I would, learning not to jump the chain, but, I would swing by his office a lot of the time. He was a big, champion. I guess that's probably not the right word, but he really encouraged me to start the podcast, big mentor for me. And I would sit there and just, listen to everything they would have to say. There was a lot of lessons I actually shared on the other podcast that I was on. But yeah, without getting into too many details about it, just knowing that when I was in his office, I was full student mode completely. But on the opposite spectrum, or opposite end of the spectrum, I feel some sort of credibility when it comes to being a leader, as I was picked as a squadron commander for the semester. And
how does that work now? So is it something that you interview for? You said you're picked. Were you nominated for it?
Yeah.
What does that look like now in the Cadet Wing?
I think it's squadron to squadron, but how it worked was, I remember sitting at the dinner table with my girlfriend, Chloe, and I saw the application come out on Teams, and I'm like, I just thought of all the KPP parade practices, all the dumb stuff that I did not want to go and do. And that was my image of squadron commander. And, being in this position now, it's pretty far from the majority of the work. But that was my perception of it. And I was like, I don't want to do that. Like, I just kind of want to, focus on the podcast, focus on all this stuff to maybe get me into grad school, whatever. But I was like, I'll just put my name in the hat. We were sitting across the table from each other and just discussing it. And so it was just like a 4-page questionnaire, more or less general, like, what do you want to do? Why do you want to do this? All this stuff.
Why did you want to do it?
When I started it, I was like, okay, I don't want to do it because I thought it was KPP. But then I reflected.
What's KPP?
Key players and personnel. Okay. Sorry, that KPP is like the lingo for parade practice, noon meal, when it's only guidon bearer and squadron commander out there. So it's like a bunch of extra stuff that nobody else has to do except for, those special people. I didn't want to, but then I was like, thinking back to Dave Harris, Colonel Rob Mishev,
my classmate.
Yeah, like a whole bunch of people.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all like, I took a leadership position, and it was undoubtedly the most impactful thing that I had done at the academy. And me trying to notice some sort of pattern within, where they are now, and like maybe like some indicator of success at a starting point. I was like, I should probably do that if I want to follow a similar trajectory to them. And so as reluctant as I was that night at dinner, I was like, this is an opportunity I have to take, or at least put my name in the hat for. But to answer your question, the paper thing comes out, and then whoever ends up applying to do an interview process. Mine was ran a bunch of cadets. My permanent party was in the room, my old AOC and my incoming AOC, the old squadron commander, and they just asked me a bunch of questions about like strats, I don't even remember it completely. But I mean, there was 6 people applying, and they were all very competitive. And I was lucky enough to get the position because, you know, I'll give a shout out. He's my chief of staff now, Will French, and Griffin Anderson. Both are in my squad. They're like very impressive young men, and I was lucky that I was like, dang, I can't believe they picked me over them. I don't really know exactly. They didn't give me a whole lot of feedback, but I was thankful for that.
That is awesome. So you'd mentioned you thought it was a whole bunch of KPP. So what is the role really like as a squadron commander?
It's different than I thought it would be. You know, I think there's this perception of leadership at the academy amongst cadets that leadership is land navving through the athletic fields in like Jacks Valley. You know what I mean? Like leadership is like these super tactical things. How can you be as close to George Washington as possible? But you know, one, there's not many opportunities, and if you're doing that, opportunities for that sort of stuff, and if you're doing that stuff, you're probably not delegating as you should. And so I think the biggest takeaway that I've gotten from this position is like representation of your people, and protection of them.
Talk about that.
So even this past week, I don't want it to be tainted that he's a very good friend of mine, because I would have done this for anybody in my squadron. But he received some paperwork from somebody else, his supervisor. He works a group job, so the paperwork was coming from a wing person, and you know, it was outlining how he had failed to do this and all this stuff. And then at the end, it had said something about his, like, I'm super cool. People mess up all the time. I mess up all the time. That's understandable. Mistakes are going to happen. But the last paragraph rubbed me the wrong way, because it said something about his character that, knowing him well, it seemed very out of character. And so, you know, I've had cadet squadron commanders in the past that are just like, you know, hey, I'm going to trust everything that the wing person said, issue all of the demerits, tours, paperwork that comes with the recommendation, and, you know, leave it at that. But my attempt to really take this position seriously is to get the perspective of my friend, see what his opinion on it was, like maybe let me gather a little bit more evidence. And upon doing that, the statement that was at the bottom of it was completely like not apparent in the evidence. And this really like raised an alarm for me, because if I weren't to do that, not only was it sent to me, but it was sent to permanent party. I'm like, this is, you know, kind of throwing some dirt on his reputation, and it's not true. And so what happened was I immediately texted the guy. It was cool. I worked with him over the summer on wing staff, and I went to his room and I was like, hey, so, you know, just trying to get some understanding. I'm not here to press you about this, but I want to understand what's actually going on here. This is what is outlined in the Form 10. This is the evidence that I gathered from my friend, and they don't really seem to be congruent. And then, you know, like he starts giving his case, and I don't disagree with any of the things where he actually, you know, failed to do things. But then when it came to the part about his character, he was like, yeah, so that's the issue. I did that out of anger of somebody else. Because I remember seeing the group chat, and the message was sent, and then my friend responded super politely, super respectfully. And then his coworker was like, you know, kind of escalatory, aggressive. And then as a result, both of them got negative paperwork. And I believe that only the negative character should have been put on his coworker, not on my friend. And he admitted to that. And he was like, I'm willing to walk that back because it doesn't give an accurate representation of his character. And so, you know, my friend was super appreciative because, you know, we ended up having a permanent party conversation the next day, and we cleared everything up. And they were like, thank you for investigating this a little bit more, because if you didn't, we, you know, probably would have just ran with the guy's recommendation and maybe thought a little bit less of him. So I guess when it comes to protecting my people, maybe that's, now I think back on it, maybe that's a first sergeant job to handle like the discipline stuff, but maybe that it was my friend. I took a little bit more ownership of it and wanted to make sure it was correct. But that's more or less an example of protecting my people, but representing my people. I guess they kind of go hand in hand. On I guess another note of protecting,
or even what you've learned since being in the role of squadron commander.
Yeah.
Pure leadership is hard.
It is
Would you
very
agree?
difficult. And I think maybe part of the reason why I was selected was because I have a relatively good reputation in squadron to be, friendly. Last semester I was D&C, so I'm outside of the formation making corrections.
D&C.
Drill and ceremonies. So I'm outside of the squadron making corrections as people are marching. And it's not an easy thing to do when, it's somebody older than you as well. And I'm over here like cracking jokes with them and making sure that I do it to everyone, not just certain people. I dig in a little bit more to my friends who I know can accept it. And then it might like ease the tension of all the other people who might be, not doing it right. And then I go talk to them like, hey, chest up a little bit or like fix your dress. But yeah, I think that was a big piece of me getting picked for it because I have to uphold a standard, especially in today's Cadet Wing. I don't know if the listeners are privy to all the change going on in the Cadet Wing, but I'm low-key doing you a favor by correcting you so that you don't end up in a 3-stars office. And so as much as it's made cadet life as a whole somewhat more difficult, it's made my job as a squadron commander who's supposed to enforce these standards a little bit easier because they know that I'm not like the highest person that's like enforcing this. This isn't me power tripping. This is me trying to look out for people.
Right.
That perception makes a big difference.
No, that's really helpful. And probably more than you thought we were going to be talking about because you were probably thought we were going to be spending a lot of time talking about for the Zoomies.
Yeah.
And I'd like to get there. So let's talk about that right now. So when did it start and why?
Okay. The reason changed over time, but I started it. I came out of CST, combat survival training, after my freshman year summer, so it was approximately like July timeframe. And I've always been an avid podcast listener, loved, hearing conversations, new ideas, learning. While I just drive, I like, I might think I'm a little bit more productive, like multitasking. And so I've always wanted to start one, but I wanted it to be meaningful, not just me and my friends just yapping in some microphones. So what I did was after freshman year, all of the, fever dream of it was over. I could start projecting into the future, not just living super, in the present. I started projecting into the future and I'm like, oh crap, I have an active duty service commitment. I actually have to think about that decision for a little bit. And I was scared because I didn't want to be a pilot. We had career night, which is one night every year, and then ops, which was a whole year out. So I'm just like, I'm not the type to just sit back and let things happen to me. And so to address this issue, I went ahead and was like, Colonel Rudder, asked him like, hey, is this feasible? Like, what sort of problems do you think I could run into? Like PA, whatever. And he was like, dude, go for it. And so started off just interviewing AOCs around base, he was my first episode talking about A-10s, even though I didn't want to be a pilot. I was like, even though I don't want to do that, I'd like to learn more about it. Same thing, maintenance, acquisitions. Being a management major was something I was very exposed to in the classroom. And then, it just kind of like expanded. I covered a decent number of AFSCs. And then I started getting to the point where I had this better picture of not only what job I wanted, but also a holistic understanding of how these jobs and career fields intertwined. And it gave me a better picture of what the Air Force does as a whole. And so that was like a big learning piece for it, but it transitioned to, okay, I don't want to just interview people and like, oh, this is what a maintenance officer does the entire time. People get out after 5 years. And the reputation right now is that if you want to be a president, go to the Naval Academy. If you want to be a CEO, go to West Point. If you want to be a FedEx pilot, go to the Air Force Academy. And I'd heard that joke plenty of times. And as funny as it is, like, you know, I'll admit it, I laughed at it. But like, I don't want that to be the perception of this place, because we produce much, much better leaders than just, you know, pilots. Like, not to poo-poo pilots, but like CEO versus pilot, like it's a different game. And so my idea was, how can I highlight that being an airline pilot, a cargo pilot, whatever it is not the only avenue to take after commissioning? What else can we do? And that's where I started picking up more perspectives, both on leadership. What is it like to be a consultant? Being, you know, I did, you know, definitely lean more towards things that I was interested in, but like equity research, private equity, you know, all these different things, like podcasts specifically about getting an MBA out of a service academy, all these sort of like super tangible things that, because I'm the target audience, I felt like it would resonate with the Cadet Wing. And so that was kind of like the motivation moving forward. And, you know, it's had so many opportunities for me. Like last week, shout out Ted Robertson behind me invited me to, you know, interview Dr. Ravi Chaudhry, and I'm getting all these super cool opportunities to expand my network and learn what it's like to do things at a more strategic level. And so it's been this really interesting, evolving project over the past 2 years. And I'll even share this little story. So this summer I worked a cadet summer research program at Lockheed Martin in DC. And one of the last days that we were there, they had this quarterly face-to-face, because it's a global, the corporate strategy arm is a global thing. So they have an in-person thing every year or every quarter. And how they started it was, we're going to talk about just things that you've picked up, whether it's personal life, listen to a podcast, read a book, that you want to share with people. And so I was at the end of this big circle, and I was just like, what am I going to say? You know, like all these people are spouting off this knowledge and wisdom, and, you know, I'm sitting here as this intern, you know, trying to come up with something that would be useful to them. And then I actually started thinking, I was like, you know, this podcast changed my perspective on a lot of things, and I get a lot of praise for it. But as much as, like, you know, I acknowledge it was a good thing to help other people, expand my own knowledge base of this, it had some downfalls and drawbacks as well. Namely being, I became super fixated on the future, and I was unable to really focus on the present, living in the moment. Like, get a little dark here, but like I was a little existential at certain points of time, because I was just like, just constantly thinking future. And I'm like, what am I doing like right now? And it became like a frustrating thing for me, because not only was I interacting with a lot of like older people, it was kind of making me feel unrelatable to my peers. And that was bothersome to me, because, you know, I never want to be perceived as this person who's like a sycophant, like just brown noser and all that sort of stuff. And so it was definitely some drawbacks. And then that like brings me to the point of, the reason why I started this was out of fear. I started because I was scared of not knowing what the future was going to entail. It was this fear of uncertainty. And, you know, reflecting upon that, I came into the academy, this confident person, and like, where'd that go? Am I not confident? Like, the two things that I think if anybody can have will be successful in any realm of life is perseverance and critical thinking. Those two things, in my opinion, will carry you anywhere. And I felt like I had those things, but I was just discounting them so heavily, to the point that I was like, I need to figure all this stuff out or else I'm going to be screwed. When in reality, like, why am I not just relying on these two things that I know that I have? You know, maybe you can work in resourcefulness. But I have these two things. Why am I discounting those? And I think that was the big reflection point that I was able to share with the people in this room at this, face-to-face. And I was like, I had this really big pendulum swing to trying to control everything. And like, I really don't perceive myself to be a control freak, as like a micromanager. I think if you talk to anybody in the squad, they won't perceive me that way. But when it comes to my own future, like I want to, in the past, I'm trying to correct it. I'm still not perfect, but I was trying to correct for this. And I'm like, no, that's not right. That's not a long-term feasible thing. I'm going to end up, burning out, never really living in the moment, never really enjoying things. And so like that was a big learning lesson from this whole idea.
And you learned that when you were sitting in that circle, or did you learn that, was that when it kind of culminated into how you articulated it, or had you already felt that way?
The cadet experience, like I said, is very task saturating. And so I never feel like I have a time to reflect during the semester. This was about July, after like this past July. And so although I was working, it was like 4-day weeks. So I had a decent amount of time to reflect. I always treat my Christmas breaks and my summer breaks as points to reflect. And because that's the only time I have like the bandwidth to. Like that whole time period, like I was just so locked in on
who's the next.
Yeah, like all this work.
Mm-hmm.
I have my Notion planner and checking boxes. Life is checking boxes. And it took me, shout out to Silas Riley 100%, because as much as we're different, like he's much more like happy-go-lucky, like super, high energy guy. Being with him on the CSERP at Lockheed, he like allowed me to put my hair down a little bit, like, just like take a little road trip, talk about stuff, not be so analytical about everything. And so I guess that's that point where I had that about month, because this was at the end of it.
Okay.
I was leaving the next day. And so we had about a month to like talk about things. I had a month to reflect on it. And then this was something that was like, it had been the first time I'd ever put it to words,
right.
if I'll say that.
Okay.
Wasn't the first time I was trying to process it, but it was the first time that I was putting it to words.
How did you feel after you said that?
Slightly cathartic.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's weird to because as soon as you put something to words, then you can like, I feel like understanding is like, if you can talk, if you can think about it, that's like the lowest level of understanding. If you can talk about it, that's slightly higher, but then writing about it is the highest level. And so like I always keep a journal, and I've been trying to write about it to put it into more concise words. But that was like it was kind of like a breakthrough of like, right. I'm having a higher understanding of this lesson that seems to be apparent in life.
Wow. And I think that's something that our listeners can, and those watching too, can really gravitate toward, because, sometimes we get so caught up in the churn of the what's next and the do this and get here. And I think an important lesson you just shared with us, and I love that you've learned it earlier on, is the key of reflection and really assessing, where am I and how do I feel about that?
Yeah.
And what's next? So for the Zoomies, let's talk about that. First off, I mean, you've gotten a lot of praise for it because they're fantastic, your episodes. What has the Cadet Wing, how have they embraced it?
I wish Spotify had a little bit better of the the data. I know I can't attach like an IP number to a listen, but to be honest, I was never like looking for listens. But then as soon as like I started growing, I'm like, a little bit more tied to it. It's kind of like seeing a lot of likes and stuff on Instagram or whatever.
Affirmations are wonderful.
Yeah. But so I think it was received somewhat well, and I always try to add value to the Cadet Wing. Some of them, I admit, are a little bit selfish. They're mostly for me. Like, I really want to talk to this person. But then I had an episode with the Office of Labor and Economic Analysis about a change in how cadets were going to get matched their AFSCs. And I was thankful that, shout out to Major Ian McDonald. He's the person who reached out for me. He is a representative from OLEA. who was like, hey, I heard about your podcast. This might be a good episode idea. And I'm like, you're a genius. You're a genius. And so we sat down, him and Colonel Joe Freon in the economic department. They were
Justin Joe Freon?
Yes. Classmate?
Well, my upperclassman. He's 98.
Okay, yes. And so we sat down and we walked through how cadets, because the initial, or I guess the legacy system was OPA, your class rank, your major, and then your preference. Those were the three things that would get put into this algorithm, this black box, and then you'd be spit out your AFSC. Now, and I think it's still in pilot, maybe it's confirmed for the class of 26, but at least for the 24, 25, those were, where it was being tested. And it was much more like an open job market where you actually able to submit a narrative about like projects that you've worked on, capstones, research that you've done. And it was super impactful because, one, I really appreciate the new system, to be honest, because the military can be very, I study a lot of like Austrian economics in my time.
Okay.
So I'm very of the mind, like free markets don't tell people what to do. Like they'll pick what's right for them. And so seeing this moving more towards a market structure, I was like, this is a good idea. But being able to share that with the Cadet Wing, that's the highest listened episode, because I think it really like drives value. People they want to know how the system works so that they can game the system. And I was like, one of my questions on the episode was like, so like, are you worried about people gaming the system? Because like, they know how it works, and they're like, do it. Like, we want you to get the right job. And so, yeah, it's been super impactful to me that cadets valued the product that I put out there. And they would value it because it was useful to them. I wouldn't want it to be, like artificially inflated just for the sake of that affirmation, even though it feels good. But yeah, it felt good to be able to contribute in that way.
I love that. So that's the most listened from the cadet perspective. What has been the most rewarding from the podcast seat from your side of it?
Like most rewarding in terms of
either a guest episode or just the experience of podcasting.
Okay.
I'll let you take it where you'd like.
I have a lot of people pose this sort of question to me a lot about like, who's your favorite episode? Like, who's your favorite guest? And, they like kind of hint at like, oh, like General Clark, like, or anyone with stars was probably a really cool episode. And, it is an honor and a privilege to be able to get an hour on their calendar because they're super busy. They're strategic thinkers. They don't usually have a whole bunch of time on their hands, but they were able to open up their calendar to me. And so it's an honor. And usually I do come away with a lot of practical knowledge from those things. I shouldn't say that those are always the most enjoyable. One of my favorites thus far has been with Julian Gluck, Cosmo.
Yes.
Because, we sit down, and same thing with Sam Ekholm. We sit down and it is a little bit of yap sash. So maybe it's more for the people who are looking for entertainment than advice or information on the Air Force as a whole. But we just sit down and talk about cadet life. And I really enjoy the evolution of the academy experience year over year. Mm-hmm. And Sam Ekholm being a relatively recent grad, Cosmo being, I think he's 2010, so it's like, in these sort of 10-year chunks. And then
is he 8 or 10? He might be
one in that time frame.
I think
And even Dr. Chaudhry, which was super fun because for the first half of the episode, we were just talking about spirit missions. And so usually with these senior leaders, it's more of what's the strategic landscape? What can cadets take away from this? But with him, it was like, talking about chickens on the freaking football field and like going up on Flatiron. And so I always enjoy those episodes from like a personal perspective of really having institutional pride, is seeing the evolution of this place and seeing the ebbs and flows of it. And it's like telling that it makes me understand that the difficulty of this place and like the perception that the Cadet Wing's getting softer it's not something that's been this, ever since 59, it's been this gradual decline persistently. It's a thing that comes and goes. And honestly, we're more or less on an uptrend than not, relative to the adversaries that we're facing. So I guess that's a big piece of it, is as much as I really enjoy learning and, getting different people's perspectives on, like what base should I choose given these goals? Or, what does a maintenance officer do at red flag?
One of the things that you've highlighted in this journey of yours is, yes, it's about impact. Yes, it's about, taking care of one another, but there's also this intrinsic piece, which is really about relationships. And that's what I hear when you talked about the ones that you really enjoyed most. I think it was that human connection. What's that thread that connects us?
Yeah, I think you hit the hammer on, or nail on it. Hammer on. You know what I'm trying to say.
That saying, yes. No, I'm with you. So, Andrew, what's next for you upon graduation? We know you're not going to be a pilot. What are you going to be doing?
I dropped 63 Alpha acquisition manager.
And that's what you wanted?
Yes, first pick.
So you gamed the system properly?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I gamed it properly, yes. And I think the narrative piece of it, I included how I went to Lockheed, and the project I was working on was very acquisition oriented. So I think I really put a lot of emphasis on give me this. So
I really, really want this.
Yes.
I'm so happy for you.
Thank you. But so we just put in base preferences. That was a pretty, long conversation with a lot of people that I had to have.
Including Chloe, is she?
Yeah, no, she was the main stakeholder outside of me.
Mm-hmm.
We probably had 3 different conversations about it. I would talk to her first, go get some other input from grads, talk to her again, more input, talk to her, and then finally input. And so, I talked to my sponsor, Major Bryce Lucan, and the reason I talked to a lot of people that I wanted to be somewhat like I envisioned myself as them somewhat in the future. They're reservists, entrepreneurial, very not, sit back 9 to 5, but how are we going to, improve national security? And have our own spin on things, have autonomy over, what we do and our time. And so those are the criteria over who I was talking to. Mm-hmm. So I had a conversation with him. He's like, you should go to LA. I'm like, Air Force people aren't going to LA. That's Space Force. Boston. And so he's like, dude, you should go to Boston, MIT, Lincoln Labs.
And hopefully you talk to Cosmo as well.
I actually haven't.
Okay. That'd be a good one.
It, but I should let him know. I ended up putting in Hanscom. But
excellent.
Colonel Mishev, I saw him at the Falcon Foundation dinner. Forrest Underwood.
Yes.
They were giving me the same, urging me, go to Boston. You're a young professional who wants to get his hands dirty. Don't go to, Langley, where, you can still be industrious down there, but you'll be under-resourced compared to if you went to Boston.
See, and that's great feedback that, maybe others aren't thinking about in their decisions. So I think that's a really great process in the way you approached it.
Yeah.
People that are in the ways of where you want to go, and also the important people in your life that you want to make sure stay important.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of every single episode on the podcast, I always ask for advice for cadets looking to pursue a similar path, emphasis on pursue a similar path. And I get a lot of advice. And not that I think anyone is, basing their advice off of maybe an incomplete conclusion, but when you're getting advice, you really have to understand what is their envisioning, or how are they envisioning your outcome, and is their envisioned outcome the same as what you want? And so I think, getting to your point, I got the advice. Same thing. This past Sunday, I called up Chase Lane, who went to Langley first, and I think that's why he really stuck out to me. But he urged me to go to Boston, and also kind of walked me through. He's like, Chloe works at Space Foundation. She really wants to be in the space world. And so she was like, let's go to Patrick, right near Cape Canaveral, Cocoa Beach. Super cool location, I mean, prayers out to the people in Florida right now. I hope that they're all right, but that'd be a good spot. Boston, wet snow every single day.
Mm-hmm.
But he kind of like Chase walked me through how I should approach a conversation like this. And so, the other night when I sat down with Chloe, as much as, wanting to value all inputs, understand where those inputs come from, and find a middle point, a middle ground for everybody, because the team won't last if we're only valuing certain inputs. And, it does take a little bit of convincing, but also more of like, open your eyes to what the opportunity really is. Are you making assumptions about this? Am I making assumptions about this? Let's clear those up. And so that's a sort of conversation that we ended up having. And, she's on board with Boston now. And so,
I think that's wonderful. I think communication is key. Luckily for you, you're big on communication.
Yes.
Right? And no, I think that's wonderful for our listeners even. Yes, there's probably times when you have to make a decision. There's a lead decision maker maybe in a partnership or in a relationship. But when you take in all of those perspectives, like you said, I think at the end of the day, when you're coming to that decision, you're in a place of transparency and, you kind of go for it together. So I think that's a great lesson for all of our listeners. We're going to get to some of the key thoughts that you have. And I also would love for you to share, and you have a little minute to think about this, but something that is, unique to you that you would love our listeners to kind of hear or learn about you. I think that's one of the things that we've been able to pick up in Long Blue Leadership is it's kind of neat when people just know what's relatable or what they think is really cool. So give you a second on that. But before we do, I'd like to take a moment and thank you for listening to Long Blue Leadership. This podcast publishes Tuesdays in both video and audio and is available on all your favorite podcast platforms. Watch or listen to episodes of Long Blue Leadership at longblueleadership.org. So Andrew,
okay,
here we are. And we can go in either order. I think, we always like to make sure our listeners kind of have a way to encapsulate the leadership lessons you want to leave them with that's close to you.
Okay.
But also just kind of what's the thing you want to leave them with that's all about Andrew?
It's weird talking about myself, to be honest, because
I bet
I'm always on the other side of the microphone.
Yes. And it's much easier asking the questions.
Yes. I think one thing that I really wanted to talk about that I guess wasn't outlined in this was the regular question of, why'd you come versus why'd you stay? And like I mentioned before, the service piece was why I came. But seeing how I haven't done community service really since high school, the reason why I've been staying is because American ideals are amazing and they need to be protected. And in order for me to have any say in that, I need to have skin in the game. And that's what I look at my service as, is me gaining skin in the game. And, I am by no means a scholar of American history. Massachusetts public education did not teach me about the Alamo, unfortunately. So when I went to San Antonio for the first time, I was learning it. But what they did teach me was about our founding fathers and, being from Massachusetts. Plymouth Rock, it's where the Pilgrims landed, and what it really took for people to come across an entire ocean, fight tyranny. Like, ask me how do you think I like my tea?
How do you like your tea?
In the harbor. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, there's this sort of state and then largely national pride as to it's audacious what has transpired over the past 250 years. And I just want Americans not to take that for granted. I recently watched Civil War. Have you seen that movie? It's like kind of a journalist take on what would happen if, states seceded. And it's like a reminder of, oh, this actually happened. Where there was a civil war, but we were able to re-amend it. And those reminders tell me that this should not be taken for granted. And so, with the kind of national landscape, the whole climate, I just really urge people to try to understand other people's perspectives and listen more than they talk. Because those pieces for me, like, I'm a pretty staunch capitalist, but I recently bought the Communist Manifesto. This is probably going to get clipped or something, but but I bought it and I still haven't started reading it yet because this semester's been crazy. But I want to understand where these people are coming from. I want to understand
critical thinking.
Right?
I
want to understand where these ideas stem from, and I want to listen, and I want other people to listen as well. I want a more general understanding of the ideas that are guiding all of this change. What are they actually rooted in? And I think that understanding will make it much more clear as to like a direction that we should all head in, rather than, you know, all this public dissent over very more or less menial things that are petty and not worth having the uproar that is ensuing. So I don't know. I guess I don't know exactly where I was going with that, but my national and state pride gives me this urge to go in some way, shape, or form defend these ideals, and to encourage other people to look at, you know, I didn't mention a whole bunch about Northfield Mount Herman, but I went to 4 schools in 4 years: Monty Tech, NMH, Marion Military Institute, and then here. All 4 different years. Massachusetts, Alabama, Colorado. In, you know, Massachusetts, my hometown, it's blue collar. NMH, super liberal. I was very international. I was in class with a Malaysian prince. I was exposed to very different perspectives there than I was when I was in Alabama. Here, there's people from all corners of the United States. And so there's this expanding perspective that allows me to be like, what we have here really shouldn't be taken for granted. I think I'm just beating a dead horse at this point, but I just really want Americans to think a little bit more and like listen a little bit more and understand a little bit more. I'm off my soapbox.
I'm really glad you shared that perspective. I mean, I think it's an insight into, you know, your deeper calling and, like you said, why you stay. Mm-hmm. But the threads of everything you've shared have played into that part of that, mm-hmm. of who you are, of the fabric of Andrew. So any additional leadership nuggets you want to leave with our listeners?
I don't want to defer to all the things that I said earlier in the conversation, but it's not about you. It's not about you. I have a couch in my room. It's like,
tell me more about that.
Like, it's a Squadron Commander privilege.
Ah, okay.
I have my own room. I have all these like privileges. I have up top parking. It's very like ivory tower centric, and that's like the perception of this, but it's not about me at all. It is about going and defending my friend. It is about when Permanent Party is directing frustration towards me, how do I not pass that frustration onto them? How do I make sure that the voices below me are heard? How do we reopen HAPS? Those are the jobs that are mine, and that involves it's my job. I think that's the main thing. When you're a leader, it's your job. There shouldn't be any extra, kudos given to you. Everyone has their own piece in the puzzle, and just because your face is more prominent than others does not mean that the mission is any less doable with like one piece missing or another piece missing. So I guess it's not about you. It's about the team.
So for the Zoomies, just to kind of recap, where is it headed and how can they find it, our listeners?
Spotify and podcasts, or Apple Podcasts. I guess that's where you can find it. I'm not going to lie, it's been on a little bit of a hiatus. I've been returning to posting, but had to give myself a break at the beginning of the semester. to be honest, I'm looking to just get to 100 episodes upon graduation and calling it a repository. I'm looking forward to some of the upcoming guests. I reached out to General Mike Minahan the other day on LinkedIn, and he got back to me, and I was like, wow. So maybe he might be on the show by the time this is released. But yeah, I kind of want cadets to understand more. There's a lot of things that are advertised about pilots, but there's more out there. And I want this also to be a testament of you don't need to do something in your extracurricular time that is an academy club. Cadets can do their own thing. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
That's outstanding. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you want to share before we close out this amazing episode?
No, I think I'm good. I've been talking way too long.
Well, we want you to talk because you've been our guest. But Andrew, it's been a pleasure.
It's been a really, I didn't say this in the beginning, but really thank you for having me on. It means a lot to me that, I'm the first cadet here, and I don't know what the plan's moving forward, but it means a lot to me that you saw enough in me to put me in company with all the other guests that you have on the show so far. And so I just hope, it's pressure for me not to do anything to let you guys down.
Well, I think you being who you are, you've already not let us down. You're amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Long Blue Leadership. The podcast drops every 2 weeks on Tuesdays and is available on all your favorite podcast apps. Send your thoughts, comments, and guest ideas to us at socialmedia@usafa.org and listen to past episodes at longblueleadership.org.